After my husband's funeral, I thought the pain couldn't get worse. But I was wrong. Because sometimes the real heartbreak doesn't come from death, it comes from the living. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and I've spent most of my life believing that family meant safety. That no matter how dark things got, your children, your own blood, would never turn against you. I was naive. And that innocence cost me everything. That morning the world felt quiet. Almost too quiet. The funeral was small, just a handful of people from town, a few neighbors, and of course my son Daniel and his wife Rachel. They stood beside me as we lowered Harold, my husband of 40 years, into the ground. I remember clutching my locket so tightly that the metal left an imprint on my palm. Harold's smile was inside that locket, and I thought that was all I had left. After the service, Daniel told me not to worry about anything. "Mom," he said, "let's get you home. You've done enough for today." His voice was calm, too calm. I didn't notice it then, but something about the way he avoided my eyes should have warned me. We got into his car, the same black sedan Harold had bought him years ago. The road was wet from the rain. The trees leaned in from both sides, their shadows stretching across the gravel like fingers. For a moment, I thought Daniel just wanted to take the scenic route. But as the minutes passed, I realized we were going the wrong way. "Daniel," I said softly, "this isn't the road home." He didn't answer. Rachel sat in the passenger seat staring out the window, her reflection pale and unreadable. When the car finally stopped, I looked around and saw nothing, just fields, silence, and the faint sound of the wind. That's when he said it. "Mom, this is where you get off." At first, I thought he was joking, but he wasn't smiling. He reached for the door handle and opened it wide. I remember my heart pounding in my chest, the cold air rushing in and the smell of damp earth. "Daniel, what are you doing?" I whispered. He didn't look at me. Rachel spoke instead. Her voice was flat, practiced, like she'd rehearsed this moment. "It's better this way, Eleanor. You'll understand soon." Then the door shut. The engine started. And just like that, they drove away, leaving me standing on that lonely road, holding my purse and the last pieces of a life that had already begun to fall apart. I watched their car disappear over the hill. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was cruel. The kind of silence that tells you the world you knew is gone. I stood there for what felt like hours before I finally began walking. No direction, no plan, just steps on gravel and tears I couldn't stop. That was the moment my story truly began. Not the day Harold died, but the day my son abandoned me. And if you had told me then that one day I'd take everything back, my home, my dignity, my name, I would have said you were dreaming. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. I returned home that afternoon, my feet dragging over the gravel path leading to the house I had shared with Harold for 40 years. Every corner of that home held a memory. The hallway where Harold always greeted me with a soft smile. The kitchen where we laughed over burnt toast. The living room where we argued gently but always ended up in each other's arms. I imagined Harold waiting for me, but of course he wasn't there. What I wasn't prepared for was the silence. Not the quiet of absence. No, I knew he was gone. But the quiet of something erased. As I turned the key in the lock, a chill ran through me. The door opened, and the first thing that hit me was the emptiness. The furniture I remembered, the warmth of photographs lining the shelves, even the faint smell of Harold's cologne in the living room. It was all gone. A bare house stared back at me. It wasn't abandoned. It had been cleared. I stumbled through each room, disbelief rooting me to the floor. Drawers emptied. Files missing. The safe I had thought was secure was open and empty. My eyes fell on the old mahogany desk in the study. The papers I had trusted for decades, the bank statements, the deeds, the will, all gone. I sank into the armchair by the fireplace, trying to make sense of it. How could Daniel and Rachel do this? How could they betray me so soon after Harold? After the funeral? My chest tightened, a weight I couldn't lift. I felt hollow, as though every memory, every moment of my life with Harold had been stripped away in one swift motion. And then the memories came, uninvited, vivid, and relentless. Harold, sitting across from me in that very chair, reading the evening paper, always careful with his words. "Eleanor," he'd say, "the world won't always be fair, but we can be just." His hands, worn yet steady, guiding mine across checkbooks, helping me sign letters, reminding me to keep records. I had believed his foresight would protect us, that our family, our life was untouchable, but Daniel had never been content with that. I remembered the subtle signs, the way he argued over money, the way he insisted on signing documents without consulting Harold, the impatient tone when he spoke to me about accounts I had managed for decades. And Rachel, always hovering, always reminding him of what they could gain, planting seeds of entitlement and greed. It hit me then, in one sharp, clear moment. This wasn't random. This wasn't a mistake. It was planned. Daniel and Rachel had been waiting for Harold's death. They had orchestrated this betrayal from the start. I clutched my hands together, trying to steady my shaking body. I felt anger, grief, and disbelief collide in a storm inside me. They had taken my home. They had taken my sense of safety. And yet, in that moment, I also felt a spark. The same spark Harold always admired in me. The spark that refused to be extinguished. If they thought abandoning me would break me, they were wrong. If they thought I would disappear quietly, they had misjudged the woman Harold had loved, the woman I still was. I rose from the chair, walking slowly through each empty room, letting the echoes of the past remind me. This house, these memories, these years of love, were mine, even if they were trying to take them away. And in that quiet, stripped-down house, I began to piece it together. The letters Daniel had intercepted, the small arguments he had provoked, the documents Rachel had pushed him to sign. It all made sense now. They had planned every step, every move, to leave me powerless. But they didn't know that I was already thinking 3 steps ahead. They didn't know that their greed, their cruelty, would be the very thing that led to their undoing. For the first time since Harold's funeral, I felt a sense of clarity. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time I knew exactly what I had to do next. I drove to Mr. Alden's office the next morning, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The streets felt unusually quiet, as if the town itself knew the storm I was walking into. The air was thick with the scent of wet leaves and early autumn rain. Mr. Alden had been Harold's lawyer for decades, a man of impeccable integrity and calm wisdom. I trusted him like I trusted Harold. If anyone could explain this nightmare, it would be him. I entered his office, the familiar leather chair creaking under my weight as I sank into it. He looked up, his eyes clouded with unease. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I wish I had better news." I felt my stomach tighten. "What is it?" I asked, my voice trembling. He hesitated, then pulled a folder from his desk. The papers inside were neat, legal, professional, but their contents made my chest seize. "Your husband's original will is missing," he said. "Missing?" I repeated, unable to grasp the meaning. "But how? I saw it just last month. It was in the safe." He nodded. "It's gone. And in its place, someone has submitted a forged version. It leaves everything to Daniel." The words didn't fully register at first. I blinked, hoping it was some mistake, some cruel joke. But Mr. Alden's eyes were steady, firm, the weight of truth pressing down on me like a stone. "My own son signed my husband's name," I whispered, disbelief cutting through my voice like a jagged knife. It wasn't just shock. It wasn't just anger. It was betrayal so deep that it hollowed me from the inside out. Daniel, the boy I had carried in my arms, taught to walk and talk, whom I had kissed goodnight and comforted through every scraped knee. He had done this. And Rachel? She had guided him, encouraged him, made it happen. I could feel the tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall yet. This was bigger than grief. This was a puzzle, and I had to see the edges before I could find the solution. Mr. Alden continued, carefully laying out the evidence. "The signature is expertly copied. The notarization appears valid. Whoever did this, they knew exactly what they were doing. Someone waited until Harold was gone and acted. I closed my eyes and remembered Harold's hands on mine, teaching me to read the fine print, to trust but verify. How had I missed the signs? The subtle tension when Daniel asked to handle certain documents? The way he and Rachel would disappear behind closed doors? I felt a surge of guilt, of anger, of something far more powerful: determination. I opened my eyes and fixed Mr. Alden with a steady gaze. "They underestimated me," I said quietly. "They think I'll just vanish. That I'll accept this." He nodded, understanding more than words could convey. "They didn't anticipate you looking deeper. That ledger Harold kept, the hidden copies, it may still exist. It could prove your case." I felt a spark ignite inside me, a quiet flame that had been buried under grief and shock. They thought they had won. They thought that forging a will and stealing my husband's legacy would leave me powerless. But they hadn't counted on me refusing to be powerless. In that office, under the hum of fluorescent lights, the betrayal became painfully real. And with that realization came a new resolve. Daniel had signed my husband's name. Rachel had planned it. But Eleanor Whitmore was just getting started. I left Mr. Alden's office with the folder clutched tightly to my chest, feeling the first hint of purpose in weeks of despair. The game had begun, and I intended to finish it. I left my empty house behind, walking away from every room that held a memory of Harold. It wasn't easy. Every step felt like leaving a piece of my heart behind. But I had no choice. The house I had built with him, the life I had nurtured for decades, had been stolen while I stood helpless. Mrs. Clara Evans, an old friend and neighbor, welcomed me into her small guest house without question. Clara had been part of my life long before Daniel was born, a voice of reason, laughter, and quiet strength. Her small home smelled of fresh linen and baking bread. It was a sanctuary. "Eleanor," she said softly as she handed me a cup of tea, "stay as long as you need. No one will bother you here." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of calm. But calm wasn't enough. I couldn't sit and cry forever. They had taken everything: my home, my security, my sense of peace. And if I didn't act, they would take the rest. I could feel Harold's absence more acutely than ever, but instead of breaking me, it steeled me. The woman they thought they knew was gone. In her place stood someone quiet, observant, patient, and unrelenting. I began retracing every step, every document Harold had ever handled. I thought back to the old study, the safe Harold had always refused to tell me about, the ledgers tucked away in his files. He was careful, meticulous. He had left breadcrumbs, knowing that if anything ever went wrong, I could find my way. I just had to remember where to look. Each morning, I sat with my thoughts, sketching out timelines and connections. Who had access to which papers? Which documents had Daniel seen? Where had Rachel pressured him to sign without thinking? Every little detail that had seemed insignificant before now felt like a clue, a piece of a puzzle I was slowly piecing together. By evening, I walked the small town streets, letting my mind wander over Harold's life and his careful ways. I remembered the ledger hidden behind the photo frame in the study, the extra copy tucked in the back of his desk drawer. I remembered the bank statements he had quietly labeled, the notes he had scribbled on the margins, reminders for me, if I ever needed them. I realized that Harold hadn't left me defenseless. He had left me a map, and I was going to follow it. The days passed quietly, but my mind was restless. I wrote notes, took pictures of old documents, and organized the scraps of information I had. At first, it was small. A line here, a date there. But slowly, a plan began to form. I wouldn't shout. I wouldn't lash out. I would move silently, strategically, like the woman they would never suspect. Clara noticed the change before I did. "Eleanor," she said one afternoon, "you're not the same woman who cried in my kitchen." I smiled faintly, sipping my tea. "No, Clara, I'm not. They think they've left me powerless. They don't know that the quiet ones are often the most dangerous." That night, I lay in the small guest house bedroom, listening to the wind against the windows, and let a small, sharp satisfaction settle in my chest. For the first time since Harold's funeral, I felt a sense of purpose. The grief was still there, a shadow at the edge of my mind, but it had transformed into something stronger. Anger, yes, but also clarity. Pain had become fuel. The woman they thought was weak, broken, and alone was gone. In her place stood someone they would never see coming. And this time, Eleanor Whitmore was ready. It was during one quiet afternoon at Clara's guest house that the memory struck me. Harold had always been meticulous, almost obsessively so when it came to money, property, and family matters. He had whispered to me once, many years ago, "Eleanor, if anything ever goes wrong, you'll know what to do." At the time, I had laughed softly, brushing it off as one of his cautious reminders. But now, sitting at the small wooden table with Clara beside me, the weight of those words returned with sharp clarity. He had planned for this. He had prepared me for this moment. "Clara," I said, my voice low but urgent. "There was a ledger." Harold kept it hidden, but I remember. He said it contained everything. Every transaction, every note about the house, the accounts. Everything. Clara nodded, her eyes calm but alert. "Then we find it," she said simply. "Where did he hide it?" I closed my eyes, letting the memories come. I pictured the attic, dimly lit with slanted beams and dusty rafters. The photo frame on the top shelf, the one Harold always said contained a special memory. I could see it clearly, an old black frame holding a family portrait from our 25th anniversary, slightly askew, waiting silently. The next morning, we returned to the house, my home that had felt so empty, so violated. But now it was a place of purpose. The walls no longer echoed despair. They echoed determination. Clara and I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. The air smelled of dust, aged wood, and faint traces of Harold's cologne, a scent that made my throat tighten. There it was, the frame, exactly where I remembered. I picked it up, my hands trembling, and turned it over. The back panel had a small latch. A click, and it opened. Inside was the ledger. Bound in leather, worn by time, but unmistakably Harold's handwriting on every page. I ran my fingers over the first page, the familiar loops of his script almost making me cry. Every transaction, every note, every instruction was recorded with precision. But there was more. At the very end, a folded sheet of paper rested inside, a personal confession. I unfolded it carefully. Harold had written about Daniel's greed, about Rachel's influence, about the ways he feared they might manipulate his final wishes. And then a sentence that stopped my heart. "If they ever try to take what is not theirs, Eleanor will know. She must follow the trail." I pressed the paper to my chest, feeling Harold's presence as if he were there beside me. He knew. He knew what they'd try to do," I whispered. Clara placed a steady hand on mine. "You have what you need now," she said. "Everything Harold prepared for is in that ledger." I flipped through the pages carefully, noting dates, signatures, account numbers, and small annotations Harold had made in the margins. Every line was a roadmap, every note a key to undoing Daniel and Rachel's betrayal. The ledger was more than just proof. It was a weapon. Not one of destruction, but one of truth. For the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of confidence. I could see the path ahead, each step laid out by Harold's foresight. They thought they could steal everything from me, leaving me powerless and forgotten. But now I had the ledger. I had the truth. And the moment I understood its significance, a small, determined smile crept across my face. I wasn't a grieving widow anymore. I wasn't the woman left stranded on a lonely road. I was Eleanor Whitmore, the woman they underestimated. And soon they would realize just how wrong they had been. It was a cool morning when I met Detective Miles Carter. Retired now, older, slower in his steps, but with eyes that still missed nothing. He had known Harold for years, had worked closely with him on small-town affairs, and, more importantly, he had always respected the Whitmore family. I had called him reluctantly, unsure if anyone would take me seriously. After all, who listens to a grieving widow? But Miles had answered immediately. And when I explained the situation, the forged will, the stolen house, Daniel and Rachel's betrayal, he didn't flinch. He only nodded. "Eleanor," he said, "they underestimated you. And that's their first mistake. The first time I saw him, I expected judgment, skepticism, maybe even pity. Instead, I saw understanding and a spark of quiet strategy. We sat across from each other in Clara's living room, the ledger open between us like a bridge to a plan that was only just forming. Miles scanned each page, each note, each hidden account Harold had left behind. "This is solid," he said finally. "You have everything you need. They won't see it coming." I felt a strange mixture of relief and power. "They took my dignity," I said, my voice steady. "They tried to make me invisible, but I'll take back my name. I'll take back everything they stole." Miles smiled faintly. "That's the right attitude. Calm, clever, silent. That's how you win against people like them." For weeks after, we worked quietly, carefully, each step measured and precise. Letters were sent to banks, accounts were frozen, assets were traced and secured. Every action was legal, precise, and unstoppable. A chess game, each move calculated to reveal the truth without raising suspicion. I observed Daniel and Rachel from a distance, silently noting their arrogance, their overconfidence. They believed the house, the money, and my silence were theirs forever. They laughed, they schemed, and they assumed I was powerless. Little did they know, every day with every phone call, every document, every consultation with Miles, their empire of deceit was quietly unraveling. I remember one evening, staring at the ledger and thinking of Harold. He had always taught me that strength wasn't loud. It wasn't about screaming, about anger, about confrontation. It was about being precise, patient, and unwavering. And that's exactly what I was becoming. The widow who had been abandoned on a country road was now a strategist. The woman they believed weak was quietly orchestrating their downfall. The tension built slowly but steadily. Letters arrived at Daniel's office, subtle, official, demanding explanations. Accounts that he thought were untouchable were frozen. The truth began to poke through cracks he hadn't noticed, little by little, until the foundation of his plans shook. Every day I reminded myself, patience, precision, justice. This wasn't about revenge in the way people think. It wasn't about shouting, punishing, or destroying. It was about exposing the truth, reclaiming what was mine, and showing Daniel and Rachel that no one underestimates Eleanor Whitmore and walks away unscathed. By the time the first letters reached their hands, I realized something profound. They thought they were controlling the story. They were wrong. I had already written the ending, calm, clever, and utterly unstoppable. The day of the final settlement arrived, and the tension in the air was almost unbearable. I arrived at Mr. Alden's office early, the familiar scent of polished wood and leather greeting me like an old friend. Everything was quiet, professional, calm. Inside, Daniel and Rachel were already seated, exuding confidence, smug in their belief that they had won. Daniel's gaze flicked toward me as I entered, but it didn't register. Not really. He had no idea what I held in my hands. No idea that I carried the key to unraveling everything he thought he had achieved. I walked slowly to the front of the room, each step deliberate, controlled. The ledger and the original will were tucked securely under my arm. I didn't speak. I didn't announce my presence. I simply stood, letting the silence settle like a weight in the room. Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Eleanor," she said, her voice tight, forced. I didn't respond. My calmness was louder than any words I could have spoken. Mr. Alden began the meeting, as if nothing were out of the ordinary. The reading of the will started, each clause, each line recited. And then I placed the original will and the ledger on the desk in front of him, letting the papers fall naturally, deliberately. "Wait," Mr. Alden said, lifting the first page. Daniel leaned forward, curiosity mingled with arrogance. I could see Rachel tense beside him. The forged will they had submitted sat beside Harold's original. The difference was undeniable. Every signature, every date, every notarization, it was fake. The ledger contained the hidden accounts, the notes, the proof of their scheming. I began to speak, my voice steady, controlled. "Daniel, Rachel, you thought you could steal everything, leave me with nothing, and walk away. You forged my husband's signature. You tampered with his accounts. You lied to everyone, including yourselves." Daniel's face went pale. Rachel's hands fidgeted nervously. I didn't have to shout. I didn't have to raise my voice. The truth was louder than any words I could say. I handed Mr. Alden the ledger. He read silently, the color draining from his face as the proof became undeniable. Every bank transfer, every falsified document, every manipulation, laid bare before witnesses. Neighbors, family friends, and even the accountant who had once worked with Harold were present. The room was heavy with disbelief. Daniel tried to speak, to deny, to argue, but his words faltered, meaningless against the evidence. Rachel tried to step in, trying to salvage control, but her voice was weak, unconvincing, as the ledger exposed her schemes and influence over him. I watched them unravel quietly, not with anger, not with malice, but with the undeniable weight of truth. Their arrogance, their greed, their betrayal, it all collapsed. And in that moment, I realized something. I didn't need to shout, to cry, to beg for justice. It was already mine. The ledger, the will, Harold's foresight, my own strength. All of it had spoken louder than any confrontation could. As Daniel's eyes filled with shock and disbelief, I let myself breathe. Rachel's manipulation was clear for everyone to see. The betrayal they had thought invisible was now plain. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't celebrate. I simply stood there, calm, composed, letting the silence do its work. And in that silence, I felt a strange, quiet victory. Not a loud, vengeful triumph, but something deeper. Justice served, dignity restored, truth revealed. The room no longer held tension. It held recognition that I, Eleanor Whitmore, had reclaimed what they had tried to steal, and had done so without losing myself in anger. The quiet power of truth had done what words never could. Months passed. The world moved on around me, but I took my time. Rebuilding wasn't just about walls, floors, or furniture. It was about reclaiming a life they had tried to steal, piece by piece. The house on Willow Creek had always been more than a home. It was where Harold and I had laughed, cried, celebrated birthdays, and held each other through storms. Walking through the restored rooms, I could still feel him there. In the sunlight spilling across the kitchen floor, in the warmth of the living room that smelled faintly of cedar and memories. I chose to restore the house quietly. No loud celebrations. No triumphant displays of victory. I didn't need them to see me win. I didn't need Daniel or Rachel to know that their plans had failed. Because this time, the victory was mine for the taking, and I would savor it silently, in peace. I planted flowers in the garden, soft pinks and whites, Harold's favorite. I set the dining table just as he liked it, with the simple elegance he always loved. Each action was a reminder. I still had life to live, and it was mine. One afternoon, I walked up to Harold's grave. The sky was soft with late afternoon light, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. I knelt, placing a single white rose on the stone. "You were right," I whispered, my voice catching in the wind. Love wins quietly. I stayed there a long time, letting the memories and lessons settle. I realized that the revenge I had orchestrated wasn't about anger or cruelty. It wasn't about destruction. It was about justice, dignity, and reclaiming my voice. Sometimes people believe revenge must be loud, that it must be dramatic, painful, or violent. But I had learned differently. I had learned that revenge can be quiet. It can be patient. It can be strategic. And sometimes the greatest revenge of all is simply living well after they expected you to fall. I stood up, dusting my hands on my dress. I took one last look at Harold's grave, feeling a sense of closure, and walked back down the path toward my home. The house on Willow Creek wasn't just restored. I was restored. And this time, the life ahead was mine, unbroken, undiminished, and entirely my own.